explains to Daniel what his dreams mean, or what Daniel's visions mean. So in some sense he's the angel of revelation, but he's really the interpreter of the revelation. It's in chapter 7 and 8 of Daniel. He sees a figure, and the figure identifies himself as Gabriel, and he says, Gabriel, tell me the meaning of my vision. And then Gabriel explains to Daniel, the prophet, what the meaning of his vision is. So Daniel is really the interpreter of visions, and I'm sure if I went to a believing Muslim, they wouldn't know this. The first Daniel. So, oh, well, that's what you say, but our prophet says this. So, well, yeah, but that's like putting the chicken before the egg. I mean, the first Gabriel was here, and the succeeding visions of or uses of the name Gabriel have to go back to the original usage of the term. If you're an academic, that would be the case. But anyway, don't argue about those things. I'm just giving you information. We'll see what Gabriel becomes in Islam. And Daniel has some other interesting things, like the end time, which is very important to Christianity. The Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, which is very important to the Gospels. I saw one like a Son of Man riding on the clouds of heaven. That's proclaimed over and over again in the New Testament. The abomination of the desolation, standing where it ought not to stand. That's mentioned in Daniel to some extent. Daniel is the first real biblical book that is not really prophecy. It's another kind of literature which we now call apocalyptic. It's a Greek term that we use to cover things like what? Like the New Testament book of Revelation we call the Apocalypse. Four horsemen of the Apocalypse. It's a genre of visionary literature having to do with the end time and the last things, which the Quran can be put in that category to some extent, because the prophet's always talking about the end time, the last days, and his angel is sometime Gabriel, sometime the Holy Spirit. But you can see a lot of this material from the 2nd century BC, 1st century BC in the Quran too, as you can in the New Testament. And from the Dead Sea Scrolls, like it or not, the scrolls are talking about the last times, the end time, and they're very interested in apocalyptic ideas. So those are things we know we can date from the 2nd century BC to the 1st century AD. I like to look at the Quran from that perspective and see how much has flowed into the Quran, because as an academic I like to see the connections of different cultures with other cultures. Now, believers don't like to think anything flowed into anything. For them, knowledge begins with and ends with their revelation and their prophet. And that's the way a believer will look at the Quran, and I respect that, but I don't think that's the way a university would want to look at it. Universities like to look at connections. In a mosque, church, again, synagogue, that's the way you might want to look at things like, Christian, depending how Christian you were and how, in a Catholic religious perspective, the catechism book is going to decide everything. In a fundamentalist evangelical environment, it's always the Word. The Word is the thing that begins it all. And I don't think that people are too interested in what came before the Word. The Word being made flesh in the Gospel of John, and so being born again, etc. So these things depend on your perspective. But from an academic perspective, we like to see the influence of different earlier ideas on later ideas. And we don't think things occur in a vacuum. For instance, if an Eskimo was writing the material we find in the Quran, we might not think it related to things you find in the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Book of Daniel or Christianity. But the prophet over and over again is showing knowledge about Christianity, knowledge about Bible stories, knowledge about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. He's a Middle Eastern being. He's operating in a Middle Eastern cultural sphere. He's operating from a Middle Eastern cultural perspective. He's operating within the context of literature that came before him. In the Middle East, he's telling stories about Joseph, which of course the Quran says come from an angel. That's the Quran perspective. We're not saying it doesn't. That's a matter of belief. But we know the stories about Joseph written in the 10th century BC in the Hebrew Bible. And they don't disagree much with what the prophet's saying. We'll compare them actually in this class and see what the difference is. It's one of the good things, in fact, of going to university. If you've just read the Quran, you should go read the Bible too, and then you'll have something to compare this to that and make your own decisions. But if you're just operating in a vacuum, If I were building a jet plane or the space shuttle and I just look at one set of data, I may be guilty of ignoring other sets of data that could cause that space shuttle to crash. I want the scientists in those situations, the Airbus that I was on, I want that to be tested from all perspectives. I want the stress test on that metal to be absolutely perfect. I don't want any stone left unturned. I don't want that plane to come crashing down when I'm sitting 35,000 feet up in the air. I want all the systems to work. I want the radar to work. I want the positioning stuff to work. I want everything to work because, you know, my life depends on it. So I'm not going to go by someone's faith where those things are concerned. And I don't think a person who is studying things takes all the data available to them. So a real student takes the Bible, the Quran, Mandaean literature, Persian literature, Egyptian literature. You can't do all that, of course. But Dead Sea Scrolls, whatever looks like it connects to this area, and throws it into the pot and then draws its conclusions, or her conclusions. So if I were talking about Eskimos suddenly coming up with the revelations in the Quran, okay, maybe I wouldn't want to do all that. Or someone in the Bushmen in Australia suddenly writing the Quran. Okay, then I might say, okay, there's no influence of Christianity, Judaism, Dead Sea Scrolls, previous stuff. That's just in a vacuum. That came direct from an angel to that Bushman there blowing on his, whatever, what's that trumpet they blow on, Paul? What is it again? Yeah, blowing on his didgeridoo, you know that. Okay, fine, I saw them. I was in Australia this past summer, and they were sitting out there blowing on their didgeridoos. And, but I'm sure they don't know anything about the angel Gabriel in Australia, those native people. Unless the Christian missionaries got there and told them about it. So that's the point. If someone's showing this kind of knowledge, then you've got to look at where this knowledge came from. What the precursors of, whether you like it or not. And that's something of what we want to do too in this, as we go through this material, the early part. That's what makes the Quran so interesting to me from an academic standpoint. So, I don't know how we got off on that particular tangent, but I think we were talking about angels and different things like, how did we get onto the book of Daniel? I forget how we got, oh, I know. Arabs. We're talking about Arabs and where Arabs were first mentioned. So I'm talking about the Old Testament, lest someone heap abuse on the Old Testament as an interesting book, which some people might do because they don't like things that are different from what they know. I showed you how important Daniel is to what you might know. That's why I picked up that subject to show the Old Testament has material about Gabriel. That in fact, if you didn't know that, you wouldn't know where Gabriel was first mentioned. The same with Arabs.